Thanks everyone for having me, and I'm happy to present this research on a review of research, academic research on civic technology. So I will cover just the insights that we have gained in the interest of time, and just a note that this work was supported by the CivicTech in Asia project. Okay, so the overview of this presentation, I'll first be going through just very briefly on what is civic technology, even though we have already been discussing this throughout the day. Next, I will briefly go through what was the review method we did for our review. And finally, I will discuss the findings and insights that we have gained from our review. So firstly, CivicTech. Actually, at the very beginning in Wei's keynote address, she presented this video, and the video has already covered very nicely what CivicTech is. So the definition that we take is also that citizens are the beneficiaries of CivicTech. So CivicTech is meant to serve citizens, to enhance their capital as well as to serve the public good. And the goal is to get citizens more involved and more engaged in issues of national interest, to get them more involved in governance, as well as to have them raise their ideas and thoughts so that they can better society. And the technology that is mainly that is more broadly discussed is on information and communication technologies. So these techs follows a very broad range of technology and are used in many different ways to serve citizens in the interest of civic goals. Next, I'll be going through the review method. So for this analysis, we focus on academic papers. So our review here would be more focused on the academic rather than industry side. And what we did was we took papers from the ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery Digital Library, to get 224 papers that are relevant to CivicTech. And then we conducted coding to identify key aspects of the papers for the review. And now I'll move on to the insights. The first insight here is on the trends of CivicTech publications. So the first paper that we noted was a paper on community information systems that was published in 2001. And following from there, you see in this graph that there is an exponential increase over the next 20 years regarding the academic interest in CivicTech. And if you look at the venues to the right, there are 5 venues that are listed here. These are the top 5 venues out of a total of 62 venues that we looked at. And the top contributor is CHI, which is the Conference on Human Factors in Computing, which had a total of 54 papers that were published over the years, followed by CSCW, which had 41. And then the rest had about 10 papers each. So we can see that CHI and CSCW, CSCW is the Conference on Computer-Supported Collaborative Work. So these two conferences factor for the major contribution in CivicTech and computing particularly. And then there are this blue graph here is on others, which feature the remaining 57 venues, and each venue has averaged about 1.65 papers per venue. And next, we go through the civic issues of the papers. So very, like what's most striking in this graph is a huge part of the pie that's attributed to democracy and participation. So a lot of papers are interested in the ways that CivicTech can help to push forward governance, particularly democracy in areas like deliberative democracy, how it can be more fair and transparent and just, as well as in participation. So for example, how citizens can engage in various participatory processes to better communicate with the government and to push forward civic goals. And this, I think, what Dr. T has mentioned is very, Taiwan has been a good example of civic interest in democracy and participation. And then we also have the next 9 other sub issues that each take a bit lesser part of the pie, but they are also equally important. So for example, public service and governance, news and journalism, urban planning, neighborhood local issues, education, as Dr. Neo was discussing in the first speech, and then accessibility and minority, sustainability, environment, crime and safety, and disaster, which also reminds me of the example of the earthquakes in Japan that Dr. Lim mentioned. So yeah, the civic issues are very broad and they cover a lot of different aspects and a lot of different topics. Essentially, I mean, my personal view is that it covers anything under the sun, which it truly does. So it's a very interesting and very expensive, area where people can look into, and there are a lot of opportunities here to foster more civic interest. So the next insight is on the location where these studies are conducted. So rather unsurprisingly, USA, Europe, UK, they take a huge, more than 3/4 of the pie. And this phenomenon is not just limited to CivicTech. I think it's pretty much in all research, in all fields of research, we see this phenomena. And I think because in this talk, we are interested in ICT4Good in Asia, right? And if you look here, there's only 9% of all papers that covers Asia. That's only about 20 papers. Yep, if my math is right. Yeah, so that's actually not a lot. And we can really see from the examples in the previous speeches that there are so many activities going on in civic technology, and it has been happening for decades. It's not just a recent phenomenon. I mean, now developing countries are gradually being more capable technologically to implement civic technologies, but there are still so many examples out there that has been being developed over the years. And so over here, I mean, what this shows is that academics, at least since research papers are largely written by academics, right? I guess the academics could perhaps take greater interest, especially those who are in Asia, you know, to take interest in this field and to try to advance the knowledge of civic tech in Asia, because especially when we start to think about the cultural differences in, like, for example, collectivism in Asia versus the more individualistic US. Yeah, so these differences would definitely play out different participatory processes, for example, and different ways of collective action in the different Western East-West counterparts. And the next one is on the types of civic tech itself. So if you look here, the majority is on websites and web apps. So web platforms are the main ways, the main civic technologies that have been used and created by people, as particularly those who create, particularly for tailor-made civic tech, so civic tech that are custom created for various purposes. And then the next one is social media and forums. So this one is actually rather interesting because in the field itself, there is always this argument between whether social media is considered a civic tech. So there is this argument in academia on this. And at least for our side, what we consider is that social media does foster participatory discussions and processes on democracy as well as civic issues. So in a sense, it is, even though it was not created for the purpose of civic as a civic tech, but it does facilitate civic purposes and civic goals. And given that there are 51 papers discussing this, it actually makes for quite a significant amount as well. And the next sets are mobile apps. So these are phone apps, particularly for those that are interested in, say, urban planning, web mobility. So these apps would include, an example of such an app is this Cycle Atlanta app, where cyclists, they install the app on their phone and they go around mapping the routes that they take to cycle around Atlanta. And then this helps other people who are interested in finding routes that are for cycling, for example, in across the country. And the next one is IoT and public displays. So this one makes use of sensors and, say, temporal public displays where they set up at a certain location. Maybe they exhibit for a few weeks to a few months and then they take it down. And then there's this more slightly different way of engagement, because in the prior ones it's all on the digital space, but here you have it in the physical space where, say, you have this display, and then in the central, for example, and people who walk past, they can just interact with the boards that are on display. They can see what is for example, a display on, there's this paper on megaphones where they set up a mic in the stage, and anyone can go there and talk about whatever issue they want. So it's just more of like this open and sort of distinct collaborative action where people can come and talk and then discuss in a very open way, without any huge intervention or like formality and rigidity to it. And the last one is works on algorithms. So these are on the minority, and they discuss papers on, say, machine learning algorithms to improve, say, biases in algorithms, or just the efficiency and the efficacy of the algorithms. And the next one is on the funders and partners. So very strikingly from this graph, you can see that government has the largest part of the graph. And one of the reasons is because we are focused on academic papers. So a huge amount of the bar is actually attributed to government grants in research. So over here, the grants has attributed to this distinct amount of bars. But then if we look across the remaining ones, funding by, say, foundations, universities, companies, organizations, they are much more limited in this case. And if we look at the partners, for example, organizations and networks partners the most with universities and governments. So these partners, what we mean is that they are the ones who provide non-monetary resources. So perhaps they provide the location, or they provide the data, or even the technology or the people to help to create CivicTech. And well, mainly the point here is just that for supporting CivicTech initiatives, we can't, support across the board is necessary, because each of them can offer different insights, different resources into civic tech development. And if we just want to rely on, like, currently a lot of CivicTech, because CivicTech is on social goods, so it's not exactly a profit-driven initiative. So that's why most of the funding would also come from the government. But yeah, if more organizations and a diverse set of stakeholders can offer resources, then it would surely propel CivicTech development.
Gionnieve, I'm sorry to interrupt. There are 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next, the 6th insight is on the designers and the users in CivicTech projects. So you can see that there's a huge, there's a main large division in the two camps of groups. So the blue ones refer to designers and the orange refer to users. And designers are largely academics, companies, and governments. These groups have the resources, they have knowledge, and they have the resources to push forward CivicTech development. And for the users, they are largely organizations and general citizens and specific citizens. So this also makes sense because CivicTech is meant to serve citizens in the first place. Like, citizens are the beneficiaries of CivicTech. But maybe I would just go through a bit more in detail about what we mean by specific citizens. So these are, okay, so the distinction between general citizens and specific citizens is that for CivicTech targeting general citizens, it's more broad. So for example, say a platform for election, and then for an election, you are concerned with all citizens. So in this case, this would fall under general citizens. But then if, say, your CivicTech is meant to serve a more focused purpose, you know, for example, CivicTech, the cycling for Atlanta that I mentioned previously. So it's more focused on people who are cyclists, for example. So these would refer to specific citizens. So various other entities like activists or volunteers, even professional groups. So your electronic health record for hospital staff. So this is the distinction between general citizens and specific citizens. And the last part here is on the CivicTech design and participant mechanisms. So we know that citizens are the beneficiaries, but then if we look at the design, the people who are designing them are the academics, governments, companies, and yet the people who are using them are the citizens. So over here, there is actually an opportunity for there to be a stronger co-design process between both the designers as well as the users, because the users know what they want, the users know what they need. And the users, they are not just, I mean, a lot of traditional software development is about spoon feeding, right? You understand what the users want, and then you develop the technology, what the user needs, and then you develop the technology based on that, and then you give it to them, hoping that it will work out. But then in this case, what the users themselves, they are also very capable in providing the insights as well as their personal expertise and experiences in how to better formulate and design CivicTech. So there can actually be stronger collaboration between both users and designers. So if we look at this list of design processes here, the one that has the most is participatory design, which talks about how users are actively involved throughout the formulation of CivicTech. So from its inception to its creation, development, testing, evaluation. So throughout, users are always involved, they are discussed, they even work together to create the technology. And that's the opportunity here for users to take a greater stage. So to shift, say, the right side, the orange part of the pie, and balance it across so that we even have more general citizens working as designers. And so with this, actually, I have come to the end of this presentation, and I hope that I was able to give a good review of the academic state of CivicTech research. And I'll just end off with a summary, which also briefly discusses the various insights that I have shared. So the first, at the start, I discussed, that academic research in CivicTech has grown exponentially and is largely interested in democracy and participation. And given this workshop, there is so much opportunity for research in the Global South and Asia to be further pushed, particularly since there's so much going on, but these are not being captured, at least on the academic side, not as much as the US or the UK. And there are a lot of variety of technologies supporting civic interest. So the ICTs, the ICTs can include social media, web app, mobile apps, as well as IoTs and public displays, which are lesser, not as much used by most people, but then these are also very valid and very innovative forms of technology that can help to push forward civic interest. And so for the funding and the partnerships, we definitely need more support across the board, especially since everybody can provide various expertise, insights, as well as resources that can contribute in a lot of different ways in CivicTech. And finally, I'll put the discussion of both the designer and users, as well as the design and participant mechanisms together, which is that end users can be more greatly involved in the design of CivicTech. So if we can get more people involved in the design, not just in the usage, but the design, then we can design CivicTech that is more considerate of the values of, say, the citizens, that the citizens can also participate more actively and be more involved and engaged in the development of CivicTech.